All right. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So let's just take a step back and like talk about React. So what is React? Does anybody know?
A front-end framework developed by Facebook using JavaScript that manipulates components on the screen very quickly, instantly.
Yeah, so it's just a front end framework or a front end library, really. It's different from Django because Django and Python is a full stack framework that has back end and front end capabilities, where React is just a front end framework where it's literally just manipulating what you see on the screen. And the developers of React, which was developed by Facebook, have a specific, what they think is the best way to do that, and that's why they developed React. There's plenty of other front-end frameworks out there. React right now is the most popular. It's kind of grown the most in probably the past about 5 years. It's really accelerated, and that is simply due to the fact that it's developed by Facebook. Facebook is a large company. They have a lot of they have a substantial number of resources to continue building out and supporting the React framework. And in addition, there's a bunch of other libraries that are specific to framework that you can like install and use specific to framework. So for example, we've been using Bootstrap in our raw HTML just by doing a CDN, linking Bootstrap, and we have access to Bootstrap. Well, Bootstrap also has a React library that you can install and have predefined components that we've been building yesterday to mimic what Bootstrap looks like. There's a plethora of other React libraries out there, other libraries that are specifically built to support React. There's other front-end frameworks out there. So we have React. Another reason why React is so popular is that they have another library, another framework called React Native. It allows you to develop for mobile. It's pretty much like React. There's a lot of similarities with React. There's some little differences, but it's essentially you can write mobile apps using React. Some other very popular front-end frameworks. There's Vue, which is this Vue. It's called Vue.js. There's Angular, and there's a newer one called Svelte that came out within probably the last 18 months or so. Angular was very popular about 8 years ago, and it was the more dominant framework. However, pretty much since they upgraded from Angular 2 to Angular 3, they pretty much re-architected the entire how the framework works, and it put a lot of developers off because they essentially had to learn a new framework when they migrated from Angular 2 to Angular 3. So when the developers had the choice of, should I just learn Angular 3 or just learn this brand new framework that's really heavily supported and gaining in popularity, a lot of them kind of jumped ship and went to React. But Angular is still very, very popular. It's used a lot as well. And Vue is also gaining a lot of steam. It was developed by a single developer out of Google. And it's like React. It's kind of similar to React, but it's even more. It feels like a React Lite. It's very easy to use, a little more easier to use than React, I think. But a lot of, kind of like Django, there's a lot of heavy lifting for you that's going on behind the scenes. So React is still the most popular. It's not going away anytime soon because it's developed by Facebook. It's got a lot of resources behind it and a lot of money behind it, so it's not going anywhere. And we want you to be the most marketable when you start applying to jobs. And React is a framework, the front end library that is more than likely you're going to see at one of your jobs.
Now, all of these front end libraries, or forget the term, they're all JavaScript based, correct?
Correct. Yes. I think Svelte isn't actually its own language, but it looks exactly like I think exactly like JavaScript or HTML or whatever. I've never used it before. It's starting to gain in popularity. It's an open source framework. All right.
Hey, Tom, so just to feed the conspiracy theorist in me, I'm actually reading a book about Facebook, and like what's the level of assurance that buried in all those gazillion files that React download is not something that's harvesting ours or our users' data? Is that been surfaced?
I don't know. I've never done the research myself, and I haven't heard anybody else find anything like that. However, a couple of years ago in React's fine print, it said, hey, if you decide to use the React library in your project, in your production, Facebook technically, like from a legal standpoint, Facebook like owns that, or there's some weird legal thing, and it put a lot of developers off, and they're like, yep, don't use React anymore. And then Facebook was like, whoa, okay, you're fine. It's like open source now. Feel free to use React on your production code base, and Facebook won't interfere, like have any essentially fine print stuff. But as far as like, I don't know if there's any spying code in React. I mean, I haven't heard of it, and I'm pretty sure that someone a lot smarter than myself and anyone I know would have figured that out already if there was.
Okay. Well,
All right.
thanks.
Yep. So let's talk about React and where it plays into like in the context of what we've been doing up until this point. So when we were working with Django, we were talking about the model view controller, the MVC architecture. And with Django, we had our models, and the view portion of Django is what you see on the screen, which was our templates, and then the controller, which was our views. We're essentially replacing the templates that we've been using in Django with React. So React is just front end. There is no back end in React. It's simply the presentation layer of your application. Does anybody have any questions?
So what does that mean kind of from a development perspective? Will we have, like, if we have a project where we're using Django and React, we will have JavaScript and Python files all married in?
You'll actually have a separate Django project and then a separate React app, totally separate from one another. And then with Django, you'll actually be utilizing, essentially developing Django as like an API. So, when we're using third-party APIs, if you go to a specific route, it sends some JSON data back. That's exactly kind of what we're going to be doing with our Django project. If we go to a specific route in our Django app or Django project, it'll send some JSON data back, and it'll send that JSON data to our React app on the front end. And we'll get into that more, I think, later next week. We'll actually marry the two together. So we'll actually be kind of deleting the templates folder, and in our views, instead of rendering a specific template, we'll just be sending JSON data back. And then whenever React visits that specific route of our Django app, it'll send that specific data to the front end in React. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Anybody else have any more questions? All right. So React is not just a framework. I mean, it's really just like a set of a couple of libraries, but they're very extensive libraries. And there's only technically two libraries you need to run React, and it's the React library. And then there's the React DOM library. So the React DOM library is essentially a package that provides DOM-specific methods that we can inject stuff into the React, or inject things into the DOM. And we'll see it specifically in our React app in the render method. It's not the render method within your component. It's actually React. We'll see it when we get there. And there's another React library called React Scripts. It's optional, but it's highly recommended just because it takes a lot of heavy lifting off of you. So you don't have to know Webpack or Babel. So when you're deploying your React app to production, there's these things called Webpack and Babel. So and the React scripts library, when you install it, it includes Webpack and Babel. So we don't have to do any manual configuration in our React app with regards to Webpack and Babel. And we'll get to know what Webpack is as well as Babel in a second. So if you've been reading through the React documentation, if you started at the very top of the documentation and kind of read all the way through, you'll see some things called compilers or bundlers, and that's what Webpack and Babel is. So Babel is essentially a JavaScript compiler that converts all your JavaScript into earlier versions of JavaScript to make it usable in different web browsers. So certain web browsers can only run certain versions of JavaScript, like ES6, or which is also known ECMAScript 2015 plus. So it compiles all that new JavaScript syntax to old JavaScript syntax, and it allows you to run all that JavaScript in browsers that don't support the new JavaScript syntax. So it just makes backwards compatible versions of JavaScript. And then Webpack is just literally bundles all your assets together, your JavaScript, CSS, like all your assets for your application into a single file. And so when it's actually presented and when you deploy your application to like some server, it just serves up that bundled file that has everything in it. And it kind of makes things faster and just kind of makes things easier for your web browser and the user interaction with it to run faster. So here's just an example of what a Babel file looks like. This is an example of one of my projects. It just says like, hey, React env. I don't even know what this stuff means off the top of my head, but when I had to do it, this is what I ended up doing. And here's a Webpack config file. So this is a lot more than you actually need to do to get started, but I just literally copied and pasted it from one of my projects I started a couple of years ago. You generally need an entry point and output. So my entry point was like index.js of the React app. So it goes into that React.js or index.js file in my React app. It has these other libraries that do other things with it. And then the output is literally just a bundle.js file. And in that bundle.js file pretty much exists my entire app. So when I actually deploy that, it literally just kind of looks in the bundle.js file and runs the app kind of from there. But you don't really need to know any of this right now because installing the React scripts library manages Webpack and Babel for us. So you don't need to know what all this configuration needs. It kind of takes the heavy lifting off of us.
So it manages them for you. Do you still have to consciously, when you're done developing and you want to deploy it, do you have to consciously run Webpack to create that bundle or?
Nope. The React scripts library comes with a set of scripts like npm start, npm test, npm build, and the build script builds your Webpack, builds your bundle.js file, and builds your Babel, all that stuff for you.
Okay.
Does anybody have any questions? So we won't be seeing this pretty much going forward because the React scripts library manages that for us. And then there's npx create React app. So I know we saw this yesterday. This create React app command essentially creates a single page React application with the necessary architecture, all the predefined libraries or the dependencies already installed. So it installs that for you. So it's similar to the Django admin start project.
It mentions that it sets up kind of a default file structure. Are we able to add our own kind of thing so long as it's underneath the source folder?
Yeah, Pretty much.
Okay.
So if you try to add things outside of the source folder, just the way the Create React app works, it might throw some errors. So if you just throw stuff into the source folder, and that's like the main entry point of where you're going to be throwing stuff into. I can kind of show you just real quick what an older version looks like. CD. And then this is an actual, a little more extensive app. So here's a Webpack. This is a Node.js application. So this includes a Node backend instead of like a Django. So essentially where this client is, that's the equivalent of the source. And inside my client, I have components and I have, so this is kind of where it is. But you have this index.js, which is the entry point. Don't worry about some of this other stuff that's beyond what we're going to be covering. But you have this index.js file. So with that, let's go ahead and create a kind of a React app from scratch. So I'm here in Lima Challenges, and I'm going to create a directory called make directory. Let's call it create. I'll just call it React from scratch. CD React from scratch. So instead of running that npx create React app and have everything kind of installed for us, let's go ahead and do everything, like I said, kind of from scratch initially and see if we can get it to work. So how do we initialize a new npm package? We did it like the very first week when we talked about when we did def gramma and we had to install a library to make def gramma work.
It was npm install.
So it wasn't npm install.
npm init.
npm init. So Node Package Manager is how we install packages, how we initialize a new Node package. There's also Yarn is another way to do it, but another command. So you can do like npm init, or you can, or like there's npm install, like we've done that, but there's also Yarn install. They're pretty much the same thing. There are differences, but just for all intents and purposes, we're going to be using npm going forward. So npm init is how we initialize a new Node package, essentially. So I click npm init, and it says this utility will walk you through creating a package.json file. It only covers the most common items, tries to guess sensible defaults, blah, 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 and says use npm install package name afterwards to install a package and save it as a dependency in the package.json file. So I'm just going to, go ahead.
Sorry. You said Yarn. One of the homework files has Yarn in it. It's not going to affect us at all if we do something different.
No, it shouldn't. Because, yeah, some of my Node projects have Yarn in it, and it won't mess up anything. If it does, let me know, and we can walk through it. So the default name is called React from scratch. I'm going to just click enter, version 1.0, description, entry point, index.js. So I'm just going to say, here's the file structure, or here's the package.json, what it looks like. Is that okay? I'm just going to click yes. Now I can list it out, and here we go. So I'm going to code and open this from, so here is our package.json file. And where'd it go? Let me bring something up. So what were the 3 packages that I needed to install to get React to work, essentially? Does anyone remember from the slides?
First one is React.
So I can do npm install React. Let's do that one. All right. So dependencies, I've got React right here. And notice how it made a package.json lock file. Does anybody know what the package JSON or the package.lock or the lock file does?
Does it manage versions?
Correct. Yeah, it manages the versions of your dependencies. So it doesn't. So when you npm install this, if someone were to copy this specific package or this specific node project, it would keep all the same versions of all the dependencies and all the packages the same. All right. What other ones do we need? So here they are.
I think it was React DOM and React scripts.
Cool.
Yep.
All right. So let's do npm install React -DOM and also React scripts. So you can do spaces and it'll install them both. And notice when I npm installed React, it created this node modules folder. So node modules is pretty much, it contains all the libraries that are required for React to actually work. So it's got JS tokens, it's got all this stuff. And it's still installing React DOM and React scripts. So once these get installed, we should be able to see React DOM down here and then also React scripts.
While we're waiting, line 7 is test. That's where we normally would change it to Jest and install Jest. And I noticed on when it did create React app, it would install a test file there. Do we still have to configure like a testing environment for it, or is it kind of pre-built in? I didn't dig that far deep into the actual pre-installed testing.
So there is one already pre-installed, but if you want to use Jest, you can go ahead and do that and remove that React scripts test script and put in like Jest if you want to. But yeah. So it said, okay, cool. I've installed over 1,600 packages. 59 packages are looking for funding. Cool, cool. It said found one low severity vulnerability. That's fine. That's not that big of a deal. But it installed this React DOM, React scripts. Great.
Might be slightly unrelated. When it says packages are looking for funding, could you describe what that means in like a sentence?
So these are literally just a bunch of developers. It could be me. I could have developed one of these packages, and in order to continue to support that specific package, I would like some money. So can you please give me some money to continue to support it? That's what it means. It's like, hey, please donate to continue to help support these packages.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if it was like money or like seeding.
No, yeah. It's just like, hey, if you can, please donate to continue to help support these open source packages or libraries. All right. So I've got my npm, I've got my initial React installed, I've got my React DOM installed, I've got my React scripts installed. ls, I've got my node modules, I got my package.json lock file, I got my package.json file. So now I want to create a public directory. So touch public. Nope. Make dir public. And in this public directory, this is where all my this is where my HTML is going to go, which is going to be like the entry point into where we're going to inject React into the DOM. We're also gonna, if we want to have any like static assets there, we can put that there. any like logos or whatever like that. We can also put that here. So in my public directory right here, I'm going to create my index.html file. And in here, I'm just going to do some HTML boilerplate. I can get rid of like all this, get rid of that, get rid of that. This is just basic HTML. We're not doing anything with it. However, the only thing we actually want to input in our HTML is a single div, an empty div with an ID and of root. You don't always have to call it root, but that's just kind of best practices. And there we go. So this HTML file, this is where we're going to be injecting our React components into. And then the next thing we need to do is create, let me just, let's see. Yep. So next I want to create a source folder. And in our source folder, that's where all of our actual React components are going to go and all of that. So where are we at?
I had a quick question. I guess it kind of branches off of the root, and since you don't necessarily always have to have it the same, is it possible to do something similar in between the head? In other words, overall what we're doing is taking the HTML files and we're putting them in there. It's kind of like a automated version of copy and paste is how I kind of look at it. But would we be able to do the same thing? Basically we could take all the metas, the titles, and links and put that in a separate file and kind of have it sourced similarly. Because I'm able to do that with Django in the sense of like, okay, I can take this template out, and now if I ever want to add anything to the header or to the head, I can just go to that one file and open it up that way.
So this is the only HTML. So you don't like whatever's in here, you're not going to be able to like pick and choose what you want in the head. It's always just going to be what's in here. So I personally don't see a reason. I don't even know how to inject metadata into the HTML head other than, yeah, I don't know if there is a way to do that. And I don't know what the reasoning would be to do that.
Well, for me, I do it so that way each of the title pages, like I'm on 5 right now, it's blank. So I can actually render out and pass in, at least with the Django. I can refer it, even if it's abstractly from like 5 or 6, levels away. And then I can automatically customize the title page for each one instead of having it being a static, whatever this.
Gotcha. Yeah, I actually don't know how to dynamically change the title page. Yeah, not quite sure. All right.
This is going to give us a single page app, right? So it's going to be a little bit different than what we've been doing previously.
As far as like routes and stuff?
Well, like the title wouldn't really need to change because you're not switching pages technically.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, we have our HTML, we have our single div with an ID of root, and it's an empty div, so we're not putting anything in there. Next, we can go ahead and create our source directory, make directory src. And in our source directory, we're going to include our index.js file. And this is going to be the entry point into our app. So this is where we're going to import React DOM, and import other things needed. So how do I import React? How do I do importing in JavaScript, specifically in React?
From React, import string React.
I think it's the other way around.
I think it's import React from React.
That's right.
Yep. So I'm also going to, so I've imported React. So I imported everything from the React library. And let's see. in my, let's package.json, let's split that. So I've got my React, and here I'm going to also import React DOM from the React DOM library. And that's all I really need to import to get React working. So back where I was talking about this React DOM, it has DOM specific methods. One of those methods is render, and that's what we're going to use here. So I can do React DOM dot render, and render takes in 2 arguments. One is what I'm actually want to inject into the HTML, and the other is where do I want to inject that into the HTML by like grabbing an ID or class or whatever. So what I'm going to inject initially is just an H1 tag that says hello world. And then the second element is going to, where am I going to inject it? So like in vanilla JavaScript, we can do grab that specific ID by doing document.getElement by ID root. So what this is saying is render, inject this H1 tag into wherever this root is located at in the DOM. So it's like, hey, put this hello world right in between here.
Do we have to specify the actual like document, like assign it to that specific HTML? Like, yeah, as far as where it's trying to find it? Or is that like the next step?
It's, what do you mean? Like the,
Well, right there it's referring to the document from an index JavaScript file, but we're actually trying to edit it into the index HTML file. So have we actually linked the index HTML to index.js, or is that automatic behind the scenes?
so yeah, that's automatically behind the scenes in React. That's kind of how it just kind of knows, hey, look in the public folder, look for an HTML.
Okay, because otherwise I think I would have tried to set a link if I tried to do it from scratch. So, you know, document is equal to index.html or something.
Right. Nope. So now we can actually go ahead and try to run our app. But how do we start a Django, or sorry, React app? How do we like run it?
npm start.
npm start. So if I do npm start, it's like, oh, missing script start. All right. Where is it? So let's go to our package.json file. And in here, we have this test script. Let's go ahead and add a start script. And that start script is going to call the library React scripts start. So this is where that React scripts library comes into play.
So, so that npm start, you could make that npm Steve as long as you had Steve under the scripts there. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you can call it whatever, because I've seen like if you want to do a development, you can do .dev and go in a developer environment, or like :dev. It's weird stuff like that. But yeah, you can pretty much call it whatever you want.
That vectors it over.
I'm pretty sure. I've never called it something really arbitrary like random before. So let's see if this works. Let's clear it. npm start. All right, React from scratch. We're unable to detect target browser. It's like, okay, would you like to add the defaults in your package.json? All right, I don't know what that means. I'm just going to say yes. It's like, okay. It says here's a browser list, it added production and development. These are some configurations that's pretty new to me. I haven't seen these before, but it kind of lets you know, like in the development environment, use these specific versions. So I started it, and here's my hello world. Does anybody have any questions about how to create a React app from scratch? Pretty much 3 libraries. 3 libraries. Essentially only 2 files, really. Index and HTML inside the 2 other directories.
All right, Tom, can you go into your package.json and scroll up a little bit? So I think to answer Daniel's question, that line 5 was added in there, or did you add that in there?
That's automatically added there when I do npm init.
Okay, so that's where your link is at, I guess. When you start it, it's pointed at your index.json. That's why you don't have to do a source or a script source equals index.js inside of the HTML file. That gets loaded. So I was actually wondering where the link was actually happening to, or if it was just like some default that was set in there, because I was looking at some other documentation where they're pointed at src index.js, but it's like explicitly there. Anyways, thank you.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about React and let's kind of inspect what's going on. If you haven't already, up here, there's a thing called the Chrome developer tools, as you see. And there's a specific Chrome, what are they called? Chrome.
Wasn't it React tools or something?
Yeah. Extension. Yeah. God, I was looking for the word extensions. So there is a React extension that tells you whether or not your page is using React or not. React Chrome extension. Oh, that's not it.
Is it React Developer Tools or a different one?
Yeah, it's React Dev Tools. So if you haven't downloaded this yet in your Chrome, I think Firefox also has something very similar. I highly recommend you do it. What's that?
It's the exact same React Developer Tools for Firefox.
I highly recommend.
Logo.
Awesome. Definitely download it. It'll make your life easier when you're debugging. So if I've loaded this at localhost 3000, it automatically does that. React does that for me. If I come up here on my React, I can see here, it says this page is using development build of React. And it adds 2 different, what are they called? Tabs, essentially, to your Chrome Dev Tools. It adds components and profiler. Components is the one you'll want to use mostly. And it will just show you the component tree of your app. So if I click here, click there, I don't know, you can't really see it. I wonder if I can move this. But it says like props, none, state, none, just says element h1 tag. So let's go back here, and inside of our source, let's create another file. Hold on a second. So right here, we're just injecting raw HTML. Let's go ahead and actually build a component. So in our source, we have our index. Let's build an app.js. And in here, let's actually build a React component. So if you have React snippets on, you can do RSC and just click enter, and it builds out a skeleton of a React functional based component. So if I go back and I say RSC, it says creates a stateless React component without prop types and ES6 module system. Cool. And it shows you kind of what it looks like. And you can scroll down and see other things that you can use. That's RSC. There's RF, RCF, I think. Yeah, creates a React class component with all the, but, so if we want to do it from scratch, I can do import, was it import React from React, and then do, I'm creating a functional based component. So const app. So it's literally just a function, but all components will return JSX. So all the time, a component will always return JSX. So it's going to return a div, and there's always one main encapsulating div. You can't have multiple divs separate. It always has to have encapsulated by one div. So I can say h1, hello world. And at the very bottom, I can do export default app. So this export default allows me to use this React component in another part of my application. So I'm going to split the screen there. And now I can import this app into my index.js. So import app from app right there. So it says right here, my thing is still running. It says app is defined but never used on line 3. So I can replace this part with my app component. And how you render an app component, essentially kind of how you call a component, it's just the name of the component, space, / like that. If I could press enter, compiled successfully, I can go back and refresh. Everything's kind of the same. And I look over here, I can see my app component. Does anybody have any questions so far? Or what questions do you have?
What was the snippets thing you said? There's a lot of them.
What the actual command was, or the name of the?
The name of the extension. It actually would probably help who it's by, because there's a lot of them named React snippets.
Yeah, let's see what's actually installed.
I sort by number of downloads or installations and just go with the most popular one. I think it's like 1.6 million people or something like that.
I installed one of them, but it didn't have RSC command in there. It only had RC.
So, oh shoot.
Looks like it's right there. React Native snippet.
No. Shoot. Where are all my installed? I'll find it for you, and
Okay.
I'll link it. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was called off the top of my head. It's been so long I've had it installed. All right. So that's how you create a simple React app with a React component. Now, if I wanted to create another component, I generally want, so here's like the entry point into our app is in this app component. And then within this app component, I'm going to put other parts of my, essentially render other components within this app component. So within my source, I'm going to create another file or directory called components. And in here, I'm going to have all my other components in here. I'm going to create a button component. I like to do specifically like buttons. So the whole point of React is about reusability. So I could have multiple different types of buttons. I can have a submit button. I can have a button that does something else. I can have a default button in my app that I can do some other things with. So I've got my buttons. And then inside my buttons, I'm going to have just a default button.js component. I'm going to bring that over here, get rid of my index. So RCS, I'm going to create another stateless component, or yeah. And here we go. And in here I can just say like a button, click me. And in order to import this specific button into React or into my app.js file, I could do import default button from, and if it kind of already fills it out, components, and if I do another slash buttons / and it says the two things, I'll just do button right there. And in order to render a child component, which is this default button, into my parent component, I can literally just call default button like so. And if I refresh, I see it automatically updates. Here's my app component, and the child is the default. If I click on it, it doesn't have any props. It tells you what it was rendered by. So it's rendered by the app component and where the source is. App.js on line 8, app.js on line 8. Now, I know people have seen like importing stuff like this. What does the square curly brackets indicate?
I looked it up yesterday. I think it's called a deconstructor. So it accesses like React dot uState rather than you could use uState instead of React dot uState, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I mean, if that works. I also, from what I understand of how I've seen it, if I don't export something as default, I guess it's going to break. Oh, I guess you have to export. Let's see.
The named import, not the default import.
Oh. Expected. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it wants you to wrap it in braces.
So it says does not contain default export. I think this might work. I don't know.
I think if you wanted to do it that way, if you move export up to line 3 in front of const, that should export it with a named export.
Okay. So also this kind of works like if you export multiple things, or if you're not exporting something as default, you kind of need the squirrely brackets as well, but it's minute things here and there. But you always want to be rendering or exporting your components as default. Click me. All right. Does anybody have any questions about creating a React app from scratch? Because going forward, we're going to be just pretty much using the create React app command to start creating React apps.
I take it it's a good practice to just have one component per file.
As far as here,
yeah, like each component you make, you have it in its own file, and you would only have one export anyway. Would that be
yes, correct. Yeah, I got confused for a second. Yeah, you're 100% right. All right. So with that, let's take a 9-minute break. Be back at 2 o'clock, and we'll get started with reviewing. We'll review palindrome and state abbreviator, and then we'll actually jump into the actual lecture. Or we'll continue on with the lecture.